Tomorrow, likely we'll just do Rambam tomorrow because I have to go prepare for, we have a big thing tomorrow at the college. And then tomorrow night we have the JLI class on roofs. That's the schedule tomorrow. Okay. A person stands in a public domain, chapter 15, halacha 1. A person stands in a public domain. He can stand in public domain and he can carry in the private domain. He can stand in the so in other words, he's standing in the public domain and his hands are in the house, right? So you can carry inside, right? As long as you don't cross that line, right? And it's the same thing if you are standing in a private domain, you can carry outside, but you cannot carry more than 4 cubits. And if you do that, you're exempt because you're not liable because you're not literally carrying, you're standing in the private domain, right? So you're holding it outside, you shouldn't carry it more than 4 cubits. And similarly, you can stand in a private domain and open in a public domain, open in a private domain, a animal which is outside and its head is inside, you can go and put a leash on it. And the camel, you need most of it to be inside because its neck is very long, right? Because you're allowed to deal with your animals on Shabbos, but only in your private domain. And this is something that difficult for people. You're not allowed to pet a dog outside on Shabbos, actually.
But inside.
But inside, you're right, you can put the leash on your animal. So, okay. A person should not stand in a private domain and drink in a public domain and drink in a private domain, unless most of his body is in the place he's drinking. For example, he's drinking in very nice vessel. For example, when do we say this? When he's drinking in nice vessels that he needs. Maybe we're worried he's going to take them out. But if they're not nice and he doesn't need them, or it's the pit of water, the well is in a carmelis, even though they're nice vessels, and he puts only his head, and then he can drink in that place, even though he didn't put his whole body. So we're essentially worried that he's going to drink. He's going to remove the vessels from the domain that they're in and bring them into his domain. A person can stand in a public domain and catch from the air, from the water which is coming out from a pipe or from a coastal, and drink it. So this is a drinking fountain, right? So as long as he doesn't touch it, he doesn't touch the actual pipe or the wall and take from it, right? So if you think about it like this, you got the water coming out, right? So if you're taking straight from the wall, then you're taking from one domain to another domain. But if you're catching it later on, right, then it's already in the domain that you are in. If you touch it, if the place you touch is higher than 10, and and you're less than 3 close to the roof, this is forbidden because you're taking from the roof, which is a private domain. And if it was if the place where the pipe is 4x4, whether it is within 10 or higher than 10, and you take, this is forbidden. It's not liable. Why isn't it liable? Because the water didn't really rest. It's constantly flowing. So this has to do actually with drinking fountains on Shabbos. This is actually has to do with drinking fountains on Shabbos. Most drinking fountains are in parks, which are carmelis, so it's a little bit simpler, and also you're leaning over like a little thing. But if you have, like back then, if you have a stream or a waterfall you're drinking out of, okay. Let's say you have a ziz is like a beam, which is in front of a building, a little thing in front of a window. It's going out.
It says window ledge.
A window ledge. It's going out into a public domain. If it's higher than 10, you can use it because the Rishus HaRabim, the public domain, only goes till 10. And therefore, you can use it. It's not considered if you put something from a public domain onto a private domain. Until it is, you can use it. You can use the whole wall until the bottom 10 tvachim. When do we say this? When this thing is going out in the air. But if it's going out if there's 2 of them, one under the other, and even though both of them are higher than 10, if the higher one has 4x4, it's forbidden to use it because that is considered its own Rishus HaYachid. Because you can't have 2 Rishuyos, 2 types of things using one Rishus. Okay, so this is talking about, you have these posts. Now again, if they're 4x4, they are going to be their own thing if they're above 10. And if they're below 10, they're going to be a carmelis, right? So if it's less than 10, you can use it. Okay, but if it's more, you can't. If there's not 4 on the top one, and there's 4 on the bottom one, you can use both of them.
It says, nor does the lower ledge.
Yes. Sorry. You're right. Nor does the lower one have 4. You can use both of them, and similarly the whole wall until the bottom 10 tefachim. If there was in the bottom one 4 and the top one there's no 4, you can't use the top one, except right next to the window. But in the rest of the ledge, on both sides of the window, you can't use it because the bottom one divides a rishus for itself. So basic gist of this is the rule is if you have something which is 4 by 4 and 10 tefachim high, 10 handbreadths high, it causes a private domain to go up to the sky. So if there's one on top of it, that's in a private domain, right? That's in a private domain. If the one on top is 4, the bottom one is not in the private domain, but the top one is. Anything with any ledge which goes out into the public domain that you're allowed to use, when you use it, you can't put on it and you can't take from it except for a vessel, things like that. That if it falls, it will break. But other things you shouldn't take, maybe they'll fall and you'll take them, right? So things that you're sensitive that won't touch the ground, you can use these ledges, the ledges which you're permitted to use. But things that you're worried that you'll take them into public domain, you can't. There are 2 houses on 2 sides of a public domain. You can throw from one to the other,
Really?
across the street, higher than 10. And that's if you own both of them. Or there is an Eruv between them. An Eruv basically causes, Eruv literally mixes. Eruv causes that my house and your house are the same house. But if you don't make an Eruv, then there are 2 houses. You're not allowed to just pass something between 2 houses. Even clothing, even vessels, you can throw them. And if they're higher than, and if this one is higher than this one, they're not equal, you can't throw, because maybe it'll fall and you'll bring it in. But vessels that will break, you can throw, because you know you won't bring them in. So you're throwing eggs across the street, that will be permitted, even if one is higher than the other one, and we're worried that it will fall. A pit in the public domain, number 9. A pit in the public domain, there's a window on top of it. The pit and its whole work for 10 tefachim, and you can fill from it on Shabbos. When do we say this? When it's next to the wall, or at least within 4 handbreadths to the wall. So again, we're counting if it's a pit in the public domain, so it's public domain. If handbreadths deep, now it's a private domain. You want to take from this pit into your public domain. So you can consider the wall, the window next to the pit, part of the 10 handbreadths, so as long as it's within 4 handbreadths. However, because people can't pass through an area which is less than 4 handbreadths, which is like 12 inches. However, if it's separate, you can't fill from it unless it is 10 tefachim, and now you can pull up from this thing, which is a private domain. So in a public domain is a public domain unless it's 10 handbreadths deep. Okay. You have a dump in a public domain, and it is high, a pile 10 tefachim, and there's a window on top of it. Can I pour my garbage through the window into this dump? This dump is in the public domain, right? You can pour water on Shabbos. When do we say this? If it's a public domain which is not cleared up. But a private one, you can't do it, because maybe it'll clear up, and now you're going to be pouring into the street. You got that? So you have a pile of trash outside, and it's higher than 10 tefachim, compost. And you want to pour your garbage out of the window into it. It's in a public domain, but it's higher than 10 tefachim, so it's private domain. Are you allowed to do it? If it's a publicly owned, so now you know it's not going to be cleaned up. Let's say it's in an apartment building, every Thursday, cleans up, so it's Shabbos. But if it's private, if it's your own trash, maybe someone cleaned it, right? So you're not allowed to do that. A spring of water that goes through a field. If it's 10 tefachim deep and wide 4, you cannot take water on Shabbos unless you make a wall which is 10 tefachim where it comes in and where it comes out. So you have in the olden days, if you have water running through in a wash, you're not allowed to take from on Shabbos once it's its own. Even though it's on your property, you own the property, unless you make a wall on the sides of it, right? So if you have it coming under or through a fence, then you'll be okay. And if it's not 10, you can, or it's not wide 4, then you can just draw water from it. So this is an interesting rule. It's essentially a private domain. This water is in a private domain, but it's not your private domain, right? Unless you have fences around it. So there could be something you own in an own private domain, yet you can't take from it on Shabbos.
So the assumption is, when it says through a yard, that is a private domain or a public?
Yeah, private domain. Or it could be public also. It has to have walls around it. If it was wide more than 10 ames, even though it's not 10, you can't do it until you make a wall. Because anything more than 10 ames is a pirza. A pirza means, okay, so this is a new rule we're introducing. If you have walls on something or whatever it is, but you have a breach in the wall which is more than 15 feet, the walls don't count anymore. So now this stream is coming through your private land, and maybe you have a fence on your private land, but you don't have fences where the stream is. So now, how wide is the stream? More than 15 feet. So you can't take from it. It's a pirza. It actually makes the Rishus Harabim, makes the yard, not that part of the yard is no longer in a private domain. And so, okay, and can you carry in your whole thing? Well, it depends. If there is in the pirza a post here and a post there, or you have a wide post for tefachim on one side, then you can carry. And you can only not take from this. However, if you don't have anything, then it is a pirza. Okay, so again, let me just go through the law of a pirza. Here you have a wall, right? Here you have a wall going around this book. This is my house. And there is no fence for 15 feet. My garage door is 15 feet wide. And it opens up, right? And that's where people drive in. And it's left open on Shabbos. You can't carry in this whole area here. But let's say you put a post here in the middle, a post, which makes it less than. Now you've shortened the pirza. You made the opening, which literally means the pirza means like a breaking, is not 15 feet, right? Now let's say you have put it in the water. Okay, so for fences it's good, but it's not good for the water, right? So if I have a post in the middle of the water running through is not considered in my property properly, but the rest of the area I could carry. Okay. How do you put a wall in water? If it's right, so now this is the question. The question is, how do you, if you have this stream and you want to use the water on Shabbos, which you can imagine back then when people were water carriers and you have a stream, the convenience of water coming through your house is so good. How do you put a wall in the water? If it's higher than the water, you need to have at least a handbreadth of fence going into the water. And if it's all in the water, you need to at least have a handbreadth of fence going out of the water, in order that the water inside should be separate. Even though it doesn't reach the sky, since there's 10 tefachim, it is permitted. And they don't allow you to hang a fence, except it has to be in the water. Because the rabbis made a decree about carrying this water, and therefore they said that you just need the water, you need so you don't have to make a fence which is 10 tefachim outside the water, 10 handbreadths outside the water, because the rabbis, they just want to give you a reminder that it's not so simple to take this water, so you won't get confused. Okay. Now the question is, you have a stream going by between courtyards, and there's windows from the houses open to the stream. If there's no measurement, if it doesn't have the measurement of what we said before, which is forbidden to take the water, which means either 10 wide or it means it's 10 deep and 4 wide. So then what you could do is you could take a bucket from your window and you could hang it and get water from Shabbos. When do we say this? When it's not far away from the wall, 3. However, if it is 3, then you can't pick up unless there are things sticking out from the wall here and here to make it as if it's touching, if it's right nearby. So if you wanted to draw from, let's say you have this water going through and it's either going through a public domain or semi-public. So what you need to do is you need to make some sort of connection between the building and the water to get from it. Okay, a balcony which is higher than the sea, number 15. And there's a window on top of the water. You can't pick up on Shabbos unless you make a wall 10 tefachim, 10 handbreadths higher on top of the water next to the now a wall doesn't have to be solid. It could be like a fence, right? So the water could flow through next to the balcony, or you have a wall going down from the balcony and next to the water, and you see it as if it's touching the water. And just like when you fill up this, and when you fill up from this that you made the wall, you can pour water into it as well. Okay, a wall which is less than 4 amas by 4 amas.
Courtyard.
Sorry, a courtyard which is less than 6 feet by 6 feet, very small courtyard. You can't pour water on Shabbos because it goes out very quickly. It's going to flow out into the public domain very quickly because it's a very small courtyard. Therefore, what you need to do is make a hole which can hold sasayim, a certain amount in the courtyard or in the public domain next to the courtyard. In order the water will go there, and you need to build a little covering outside in order that you shouldn't be able to see this hole from the public domain. And a courtyard and a porch, they can add in the 4 amas. And what is the amount that holds a sasayim? This is half amma by half amma with 3/5 of an amma. So basically what we're worried is if you're not allowed to pour water from a private domain to a public domain. So now if you pour and you have a big field, big house, you pour the water. Now it takes time to go outside. However, if it's very small, you're basically pouring into the public domain. So what you need to do is you need to have a collecting area in order that it'll take a little bit more time.
Just for the purpose of slowing it down.
For the purpose of slowing it down, so you're technically pouring into the private domain, and it's not like so obvious you're just pouring it into the public domain. If it is less than this amount, if this hole that you made, so we said it has to be half amma by half amma with 3/5 amma deep. If it is less than sasayim, you can throw, you can pour into it until it's full. However, if it is sasayim, then you can pour as much as you want, even though the water is now going to go out right away. When do we say this? In the time of rain, when when the courtyards aren't really benefiting, and the purpose of these pipes is to just get water out, and people aren't going to say that you're planting things. However, if it's in the summer, if it holds sasayim, you can't pour except sasayim. You can't pour except the amount that you dug. And if it's less than that, you can't pour in anything at all. Okay, so this is another thing on Shabbos. You're not allowed to pour water outside on the ground in places where it's going to grow, right? So now I'm pouring in a place where it's not going to grow. But if it's in the summer, now it's going to flow into the public domain. People are going to say, hey, this guy's planting. So then you can only pour how much your drainage hole allows. Okay, a drain which you pour water into it and it goes until the field and then it goes out to the public domain. And similarly, a pipe which you pour water into its mouth and it goes into the wall and it goes into the public domain. Even if it is 100 amas, you cannot pour on it because the water goes from you into the public domain. Rather, you should pour outside of it and it will go inside. So this is talking about you have a drain, right? And you have a drain. Now, when you pour into this drain, it's going to go straight to the public domain, right? So let's say you have a window on your roof and you have a roof drain. So what you should do is pour next to it and then that water will flow in. That's okay. When do we say this? In the summertime, but in the wintertime, you can pour and you don't have to stop because things are made for flowing and a person would want that it would just get rid of the water. So again, the summertime is the time where people are growing things. Okay, if you're pouring it on top and the water goes to Carmelis, then it's permitted. So if the street's not 16 almas wide, then it's permitted even in the summer because the rabbis made this decree about pouring out the water, and they said this is only with regard to a public domain. But if it's regard to a common, it's not a problem. Therefore, it's permitted to pour on top of the wall of a boat, and it goes into the sea. Because again, we said the sea is not a public domain. The sea is a Carmelis. Okay, number 20. A person should not fill up from a boat unless he has a place which is 4x4 going out from the boat into the sea. When do we say this? So again, you shouldn't just pour directly out of the boat because the boat is a Carmelis. Carmelis, we said, is a place which is not a public domain, and you're not allowed to remove from a private domain into a Carmelis. The only thing is it's not biblical. Yeah.
So why isn't the sea a public domain?
So we said public domain has to have people access to the public.
Okay.
The sea doesn't really have access to the public as much as a street.
Okay.
So you can't just pour out of the boat if you're on a boat on Shabbos. Just putting it out there. Someone I know is just telling me they went to Alaska on a cruise, and they were on the boat for Shabbos. It was very interesting. They were asking me all these different questions. There's two cruise liners that go to Alaska, kosher cruise liners. One is totally kosher. It's a small one, totally kosher, kosher entertainment, all Jews, very, very expensive. And one of them is actually someone who took a major cruise liner, and he said, hey, you have 4 kitchens, 4 wings. Let me buy a wing, and I will sell that to Jews and kosher food, and we'll get our own chefs. So they went on that one, which is very interesting to hear about it. Okay, so you can't pour from on the boat when, unless you make a place, unless you have a place 4x4, and then it goes out. When do we say this? When it's within 10. But if it's higher than 10, then you can have a ledge of anything, and that is exempt. So if you're within 10 of the water, right? So now your boat's very low. Now you're not in the public domain, right? A private domain. But if you are above, so now you can have a ledge, which is a makam patur, which is not 4x4, and that thing you're permitted to put anything, and wherever that goes, it's not a problem. Okay, if you're reading a sefer in a Carmelis, a sefer is a book, and you're reading it in a Carmelis. A Carmelis again is like a park. We said it's either something like a private street, an alley, a park has 4 walls, no one's living there. Okay, and you're holding it, and it's a rolled up book, like a Torah scroll, and you drop a side of it, and it rolls into the public domain. So what do? Right? You're in a Carmelis, and it rolled out into public domain. You cannot, halachically, it is forbidden to take from a public domain into a Carmelis, or a Carmelis into a private domain, or a public domain into a Carmelis, or a Carmelis into a public domain. If it goes outside of 4 amis,
You should flip it onto the
so what should you do?
turn it over.
You turn it over, and you leave it. Maybe, why? Because maybe the whole thing will fall out of your hand, and it will go more than 4 amis. If it went within 4 amis, then you can pull it to you. Because and similarly, if it went to Rosh Hashanah, you can pull it to you. If you're reading it in Rosh Hashanah and it rolls into Rosh Hashanah, if it lands, you turn it over. And if it doesn't land, but rather it's hanging in the Rosh Hashanah and it didn't reach the ground, then you can. Okay, so if you're inside and you have a scroll and it rolls out outside, you're stuck. You're really stuck. However, if it's hanging, right? Let's say it's hanging, then you can still roll up so as long as it doesn't land. If it's a Carmelis, so it's an interesting thing, like likely this area outside, there's no cars there and no wall there. This area right outside would be a Carmelis, right? Unless you put some kind of Eruv up. Now, if you have cars there, it makes walls and everything like that. So, so if something would roll out, you can potentially be stuck. If you have there's like a coat, so it's like a thorn, splinter, something which people are going to hurt, they're going to step on. So you want to move it, but you can't move it on Shabbos. So what do? You pass it less than 4x4, you pass it to someone else in order that people should not get hurt. If it's in a public domain, you go less than 4 amis. And if it's in a Carmelis, you can move it. The rabbi says you can move it. Even 100 amis. Similarly, if you have a dead body, someone dies in the street. Now, if someone dies in the street, they're muktzah. They're dead already. You can't heal them. It's not saving a life anymore. But if it's dead and it's hot day and the body is starting to smell, right? And people are not able to take it, you can move it from a Reshus Yachid, from a private domain, to a Carmelis. Dead bodies, by the way, are muktzah. See later, you're not allowed to touch a dead body on Shabbos. So you can move it into a Carmelis. So you can move it into a private street. If you're going to go to mikvah, so you go into the sea, when you go, you should dry yourself, because maybe you shouldn't walk 4 amas with the water from the ocean. Maybe you're going to be carrying that water on you. So, so that's something you need to do.
Good question.
Yeah. Questions?
So earlier on, a few paragraphs where we said you can't pour, here it's translated as a sewer, directly into the pipe. Exactly, the flushing of the toilet, because the water obviously is being moved out of the private domain almost immediately. And the same for the kitchen sink or any other, right? So
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no question that when modern plumbing came around, Let me just get my Tanya and I'll answer the question. Give me a second.
Okay?
I brought the wrong book.
Lot to learn.
Just give me a second. Sorry, I outsmarted
Book should
myself.
come with diagrams.
I brought my Tanya, and then I put it somewhere, and then I don't remember where I put it. I brought it.
I can tell you exactly where it is. It's the last place you're gonna look.
Correct. No, it's funny because I
And you'll find it
specifically had
in the
a
last
different
place you
room.
look.
It's always gonna
I
be down
specifically
the
had it in a
last place
different
you look.
room, and I brought my Tanya to this room. Okay, yeah. So I'm sure I don't know the history, but I'm sure these things were big questions, and the rabbis probably checked out. Like if you're flushing a toilet, it makes a big difference that you have no idea where the water's going. Number two, you have no idea where the water's going. In other words, you don't know, you're not watching the water go out. In fact, no one's watching the water. No one outside is like, hey, he just flushed his toilet. Second of all, the other thing is it's very indirect. It goes through a pipe to another pipe to another pipe to another pipe. It's not like going straight. So, I mean, it sounds funny, but if you would, there are places where, if you would go and you'd pour the water you wash your dishes outside your window or into a drain, and it goes into the street, it goes into plants, gardening. People use it actually, and people say it's good.
Very well.
Then that's where it would be. So likely the halachic reason why it's okay is because you are really likely the halachic reason why it's okay is because you're not keeping track of it at all. It's going, and it's not going to a public domain either, because the pipes are not considered public domain. Those are considered a carmelis. So if you would have, and if you can imagine, you have certain bathroom systems nowadays, likely, where they say, hey, it's great, we recycle the water, and look, we're planting beautiful flowers with it. And, when you go to campsites, you always see the beautiful flowers growing around the collecting tank. And so, but nowadays, those things, that's likely where halachically they don't have a problem with it. You're not directly seeing where the water goes, and it's going to a private thing. Now, these things are mainly decrees of the rabbis. They want you to be extremely conscious. And you can see carrying on Shabbos is like the worst law. It's so detailed, and many rabbis say like that is the main law of Shabbos. It's like
In Hawaii, a lot of the homes, especially the ones out in the country, just dig a hole, and everything that you dump into the pipes goes right down into the hole and then gets leached out from
Septic.
there. So any kind of wastewater or any kind of human waste. So how does that apply to?
it's funny because down here in the shul, the sink, the laundry, all the water here goes to gray water and goes into plants.
Right, but not in Hawaii. So I'm kind of curious how that applies.
So-
Because it's a cesspool, basically.
So I think
just
I don't
leaches
know
out
for
into the
sure. I don't know for sure. Now here, what it does is it collects in a tank, and then when that tank gets full, then it goes out, right? So you're now all these things. Now when you're going to the bathroom, You're really not trying to spread the water anywhere. You're going to the bathroom. It's probably not a problem. But when you do other things, you use the sink or whatever it is, a lot of the water is clean water, relatively clean. And so I'm sure there are people who explored these things halachically, but I think generally it's allowed in most modern systems. That's my belief. I don't know. I never, when these things were created, rabbis wrote about them. So there are once in a while you come to something like this and it's like, yeah, it's forbidden.
It's a corner case.
It's forbidden on Shabbos. It happens once in a while. All right. We're holding in Tanya.
Still on chapter 33?
Chapter 33. Okay. So what we said is basically, what we explained is that we're talking about how to be happy. And we said another thing. So we went through this whole long thing, where does sadness come from, the different reasons for sadness, the priorities of your godly soul. So now this chapter in Tanya is going to talk more about joy. And we said when you need to zakcha la'ira b'simchas levav. Sometimes you see that you're not happy, and you have to make yourself happy. So he said, what should you do? You have to meditate about inyan yechud yisbarach. And the Alter Rebbe uses all these words where you meditate, yamik, in depth, v'yitzayir. You have to draw, literally means you have to draw in your mind. So these two meditations we give here are not something where, hey, do you understand the meditation or not? It's something that you have to actually think about and take a long time to think about. And if you think about this, you'll come to the conclusion. So what were the two parables we said you have to think about? Number one, you have to think about ha'oisius b'machshava, the letters in your thought, how they're really nothing. They're really there to express your emotions. And when it comes to your emotions, they don't exist. So the whole creation of them is really nothing. The whole creation of them is really nothing. So he said the same thing. God created everything in the world, but did God leave the world? No. God is 100% in the world, just like before. We can't see him, right? We can't see God, clearly. But he is 100% present. So now everything in the world is really in him. Everything in the world is really him and in his control. That's number one. Number two, we brought a physical parable. We said we have light from the sun. Now we said, where's the light greater? On earth or in the sun? So we said, well, depends. On earth there's light. In the sun, we can't really call it the sunlight. It is the sun, right? Well, so if the light is here and it gets stronger as we get closer, it must be in there. So we said, you're right. When it's in there, it's even stronger, but it's even more nothing. It has less of a name. It cannot be as defined. So we said the same thing is in this world. We said the same thing in this world. God is infinite, and therefore God is everywhere. There's no place void of God, and everything is really God. Everything is really God. So really, this world is not like a something projected away from God. It is something which exists within God, and therefore, if something exists in God, you should never lose hope. You should always know that God is fully there with you. You can never get upset. You should never get upset, right? Because now this is something that you have to process a long time. And when you process it, a long time, then it will change your way of thinking. So that's what we said. We said that God fills the whole world. Okay, so now the Alter Rebbe continues. Now I just want to stress how many times the Alter Rebbe says the word yamik, yitzayir, which means think about, until envision in depth, deeply. This is not something where it's like, yeah, I understand how God is in the world. If you do that, it won't change the way you feel. Because the way we change the way we feel is by meditation. It's by thinking about something 1,000 times. Then we can change how we feel a little bit. When we just understand something, then what we try and do is say, hey, I understand this. Now I won't be upset anymore. And what we end up doing is controlling our emotions, which our emotions don't like to be controlled. So what happens is they just snap back even harder. So the Alter Rebbe keeps saying, don't try and control your way you feel about God. You have to think about this a lot. Yamik. And so now we're holding, now when one contemplates this deeply. And so we said basically God is the only true existence in the world, and this is a verse in the Torah. God is the only true existence. Nothing exists outside of him. There's no reality which he does not have full control over.
Okay, but don't we also have freedom of choice? So how do we justify both of those? If he's in complete control, but we are allowed freedom of choice, what?
Well, so that's a very deep discussion. But to put it short, God gives you a choice, right? And one of the things we'll learn is the results of your choice aren't really up to you.
I'm sorry.
The results of your choice aren't really up to you. Choice is the gift that you give. You get to give gift when you choose God. Then you are turning your heart to God. So this is what it says in the Talmud. It says, Hakol bidei shamayim, everything is in God's hands, chutz miyir shamayim, except for fear of God. So your choice is fear of God, basically. You have choice. So you have a situation here, right? I'll tell you a story, beautiful story. There was, when I was younger, when I was a kid, there was a guy in LA and his wife was very sick. And they said, should she get this surgery or that? Should she get this operate or not? If she doesn't operate, she'll die. In a couple months. If she operates, maybe she'll die now, but maybe she'll survive. So he gathered 3 big rabbis together and he asked them, and they all agreed he should operate. So he operated, and she died during an operation. So someone came to him and he said, are you upset at the rabbis? Are you upset? And he said, absolutely not. I said, why not? Because I did what God wants. Now, hakol b'dei shemayim chutz miyir shemayim. When someone dies, that's up to God. When someone's time is over, that's when they die. Yirah shemayim is fear of heaven. So free choice is categorized as fear of heaven. So God creates the whole world. Now, if you know God's in control of the whole world and everything like that, now your choice is free. Because it doesn't really matter the results. Those are all up to God. It doesn't matter what God creates. What matters is, am I dedicating my heart to God or not? That's the ultimate free choice of a person. Am I choosing to do what God wants or not? And then everything else is really just nullified. It's just God working everything.
But how do you know what God wants?
Right, that was my next question, Paul.
Well, so God communicates it to you through Torah, through your rabbis, through your experiences. And, you know, one thing that every Jew and every human can do is they can always want to do the right thing. They can always want to do the right thing. They might not know what the right thing is, but they can always want to do the right thing. That's a lot of times the choice of people is they say, I want to do something good. That's their choice. And sometimes the choice might express itself further for different people. For you, you might say, what is the right thing? The right thing is to put on tefillin. So I want to put a tefillin on today. That's your choice that you're making. You want to put tefillin on today, right? Now, God might not give you tefillin that day, or your tefillin might not be kosher, right? But you want to put tefillin on. You choose to put tefillin on. So that's the gist is, so not going to free choice too much here. What we're talking about here is we're saying that every result, hakol b'dei shemayim, everything is in the hands of God. Everything is in the hands of God, except for your fear of heaven. So you look at the whole world is like a complete platter. God made this beautiful world, or ugly world, however you want to look at it, and you wake up and you say, well, if God's in control of everything, what can I do? What can I do for God? Let me try and do something for God.
But if, I don't know if I'll go down this road, but then every decision is a coin flip. Because you're saying, what we just said was, we have choice, but not the consequences of the choice. So God's choosing the outcome. So if you take the operation decision, you have a child, your child, the doctor says if we don't operate for sure, the child will die. If we do operate, the child may live or die. If it could be successful, it could fail. But we can't know what God is choosing for that child, right? It's a life that's...
Correct. The child might die or not, regardless, and the hospital might burn down.
So
right?
Why not just flip a coin?
So this is what free choice is. What is a Jew meant to do? A Jew is supposed to say, I'm trying to follow Jewish law. What does God want me to do this in this situation? What does God want me to do in this situation? Put the results aside. What does God want me to do? And that's called halacha, the Jewish law. That's what God wants me to do, right? So it's my choice. I can flip a coin. I can go to a fortune teller. I can go to more doctors. Or I can go and look in Jewish law. I can go speak to a rabbi and say, what does God want me to do? What does Jewish law, what does God tell me to do in the Torah, right? And that's actually your choice. You can go and and you know what? It's possible that different ways, it'll seem like it works out in different ways. Your choice is to say, how can I put this in God's hands or not? Do I want to take God as a factor in this decision or not? Not how can I convince God, so like there are some people that get sick. What do? They run around and they start going to more doctors. Some people, they say, no, I have to pray more. I have to give more tzedakah. What does Jewish law tell me to do anyways? What does the Torah tell me to do in this situation? The Torah tells me, so that's what it's saying in the Talmud. Hakol b'dei shemayim. Everything is in the hands of God, except for yiras shemayim. God gives us the ability to say, I want to do this the Jewish way, the Torah way, the godly way.
But don't we say that in a lottery, God chooses the outcome?
Correct.
So that flip a coin. That's a lottery.
Does Jewish law tell you to flip a coin?
How do you know what Jewish law is?
You study Jewish law?
But
you study the Torah? You ask a rabbi?
the kid needs an operation. the doctor says for sure, the example I just gave. How do you look to Jewish law to decide whether or not to have that operation?
You speak to a rabbi. Jewish Torah has a whole section on how to deal with medicine. Actually, thousands of the letters of the Rebbe are medical questions, and the Rebbe answering. This is what Jewish law says to do. Jewish law, it says to pray, to give tzedakah. It says to ask a doctor who you trust. If you don't know, ask a second doctor, get a third opinion and follow the majority. These are all specified in the Talmud and Jewish law. So actually, this is actually very free when you're in tough situations and you're able to remove the results from yourself and say, I don't want to be reactive, make a reactive decision based on science and statistics or on my own. I want to make an active decision. I want to do the mitzvah in the situation. What mitzvah do I have in the situation? Someone recently came to me and they said, their father wants them to sign the do not resuscitate form and take care of them medically. And they said, I'm too nervous to do it because my father doesn't want me to let him live if he's suffering. And he's like, I can't, I love him. What should I do? I said, you know what? You should be uncomfortable signing that because you don't want to take away life from somebody. What you should do is you should give over those rights to a rabbi who knows the Jewish law what to do. And then they'll deal with your father according to the Torah. So you have a choice. You can say like, oh, I don't like quality of life like that. I want to die, right? But the question is, does Jewish law allow you to do that? That's a big question. Some situations yes, some situations no. So that's what the Talmud is saying. Everything is in the hands of God except for the fear of heaven. We have the ability to look at every situation and say, what does the Torah want me to do in this situation? And really, it's with almost everything in the world, the Torah has some sort of law or some sort of ramification.
So what does the Torah then say, or even my rabbi say, about taking the ventilator out of somebody?
So I just want to say, that actually, we're probably going to give a class on it later this year, but taking the ventilator is a very complicated question. And I don't know the laws. When I've been in such a situation, I call a organization of rabbis, some are doctors, some are just experts in medicine, and they define exactly different parts, all these different questions. And it's quite complicated with modern medicine. And there's full organizations on the East Coast that literally make themselves available 24/7, rabbis, because they know that at any split second, they might be saving a life, they might be they might be allowed to help somebody, help a certain situation. So there's Jewish law and all these things. And this is of the medical ethics in Judaism is of the most complex laws of Judaism. And the reason being is because the core laws have to be applied in every generation to the medicine. And modern medicine changes very quickly and it's very complex. And therefore you have many rabbis who spend full time studying modern medicine, and some of these rabbis are better than your doctor because they're looking at such a broad scale of all the different healing methods in Israel and America and Russia and all the different medication and stuff like that, and they're defining what is the Jewish law in the situation. So that I personally don't feel comfortable answering in general these questions because I am not on the scale of studying medicine or the laws having to do with medicine, modern medicine, which are applicable in life and death questions. But every year at the Chabad convention of rabbis, they have these rabbis go and work workshops, and they're fascinating workshops. But ultimately, what they say is they say, here's my cell phone, call me in the situation because, in Canada now they're letting people do suicide by choice, right? Which is against Jewish law, and so there are different ways to get around it and everything like that. In America, different states have different rules, different laws about different things, and it's quite confusing. But ultimately what we're saying is, if you know everything is in God's hands, well then nothing really matters except for what you do for God, right? That's what matters
So
in
let
life.
me ask you then, this is one that applies specifically to you. My wife wasn't Jewish.
So these are all things to take into account. I don't know the do not resuscitate laws. I've dealt with the situation before, but I literally was like a puppet, because
Okay, but you didn't let me really finish
Yeah.
my question. Should I have come to you when I made that decision, before I made that decision?
you know, never hurts to ask a rabbi, but yeah, you
I
probably
didn't think to.
you probably
because
should have.
We already had.
Well, so it never
you
hurts.
know,
Never hurts to
that
ask
we
a
might
rabbi.
resuscitate.
So it never hurts to ask a rabbi, the situation. But like there are a lot of different laws that Jewish people do apply to Gentiles and stuff like that. So it never hurts to ask a rabbi, and that's for the future. But yes, there are Jewish laws related to almost every medical situation, and to every and yeah, me personally, I try and follow them. That's.
So,
Go ahead.
were you finished?
I'm done.
You asked, so we do that. There's this is hypothetical, so I don't expect a hockey answer, but I'm just curious.
Well, so I tell you, like medical ethics, we're gonna give a class on medical ethics probably in April, May, June. But like there's literally hundreds of volumes of books written about these questions because they're very complicated, about the medical laws and very complicated about abortions, end of life matters, life and death surgeries, donating your bodies to science, different things like that. There are many, and there's many disputes amongst rabbis also nowadays, and so yeah.
Oh, so actually I have two questions. So in this hypothetical situation, operate, don't operate? And let's say you do the halakhic path, and the rabbis consult, and you are asking the right people. I come to you,
Yeah.
and and so the outcome is operate,
Let's say, yeah.
and the person dies. How do we interpret that outcome? What do we say about that outcome?
And so that's the story I told you just a few minutes ago about this guy in LA whose wife died. And they said, "Do you have any guilt for operating?" And he said, "No." He said, "Because I did the right thing."
That's not my question.
Yeah. So how do we interpret? We interpreted that the person's time was over and they fulfilled their mission in the world. And
So God decided the person should die.
yeah.
So that outcome is the same as if we had not operated.
Correct.
I have to think about it. My second question is, in doing a will, we've talked, should there be a provision or a clause? Say it comes to a ventilator, you have a stroke, it's blah, 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 and you have to make this decision. Should we have a paragraph that says explicitly require the involvement of a rabbi?
So there is actually a website that has a form for every single state, which is like super easy to sign in order to have that clause known to the government or whatever it is. And there are even Chabads that I know that have every guy who walks in the door sign it because a lot of times in America, there's different laws in every state about all sorts of these decisions and people are unaware of them. And when someone dies, and when someone dies, what you do with their body, or if someone's in a life and death accident, and there's different laws in every state, and people are largely unaware of them, and some of them breach Jewish law. So there is a website, there is an organization in America, and one of the things they do, and I actually just spoke to the rabbi about something else recently, but one of the things they do is they encourage to sign a paper and even just keep it in your wallet. Keep it in your wallet, and they have it signed somehow, notarized or whatever it is. And so there is something that, so people always want to be buried Jewish, and they say, "Well, die a Jew," but those clauses, and it gets very, very complicated because, the laws are extremely complicated because human bodies are very mysterious, and we saw during COVID there were people who like basically died, and then suddenly woke up. And human bodies are very mysterious, but like I know a doctor in LA. He's an Orthodox Chabad doctor, and they told his wife, "Your husband's dead," basically, and then he woke up. Now he was young and strong and everything like that, but it is good to have that. Now I can text you the website. I can't remember. It's called like NSAC or something. It stands for
We need to change our wills.
National something. Now the reason why is because there is halachic. Now when you call the rabbis who work on this are like, some of them are doctors, most of them aren't, but this is like their full-time organization. They fundraise for these organizations because they feel like, they have to be the experts for the world, on these subjects.
So, do we have a halachic authority in Arizona
No, but there's basically
that we,
an organization that in America, which has contracts for every state, and it's free. They have a thing to sign for every state, and you can put the name of a rabbi, any rabbi, but that rabbi, what usually happens is basically if you call a rabbi, any rabbi, they're going to call this central organization, right? Any rabbi, any Orthodox rabbi is going to call the central organization because they're the authority, period, right? Now the problem usually is people usually don't legally give it into the hands of the rabbi or the organization. So usually what happens is it happens the other way. The rabbi says, hey, it's forbidden to do that. And the family says kind of like, what does this have to do with you? What does it have to do with you? And it's like, well, this is Jewish law. This is a department of Jewish law. So usually that's where it happens. So
What about wills?